Hi guys, how's it going? Welcome back. Chapter 19, we're doing section 3 today, all about blood. So please follow along in your books. Make sure you're taking notes because you will be tested on this material. All right, so what is blood made out of? Lots of different things, okay? Let me go ahead and get all of the components up here for you. All right, so plasma is actually the majority of blood. Slightly over half of blood is plasma. And plasma is 90% water. It's basically the liquid portion that carries all of this stuff. So remember, your circulatory system's function is to transport materials to your body. Well, the plasma is what carries it, okay? Also contained in blood, we have red blood cells, RBCs, and their main function is to carry oxygen. They are a unique kind of cell. They don't actually have a nucleus, but they contain special proteins that we'll talk about in just a minute. White blood cells, there's much fewer of them than the red blood cells. So if you look at the diagram here, let me get my pen. I'll choose yellow, okay. These kind of purpley large cells, I don't know why they're not called purple blood cells, they're the white blood cells. And then these little donut-shaped things, those are your red blood cells, okay. They're really flat, just for ease of transport, I guess. There's many more red blood cells than there are white blood cells. And the white blood cells are part of your immune system. They come in and they fight disease. They fight against germs, okay? And then the last thing, you can see these little purple things. They remind me of Fruity Pebbles, okay? Much smaller than the red blood cells. Those are platelets, and they help with clotting. When you cut yourself, you bleed. Your body needs to be able to stop that bleeding, and that's what the platelets do. We'll talk about that more in a minute. Okay, so back to the red blood cells. The red blood cells contain this really large protein. This purple squiggly thing that you see down here is a really long molecule that kind of folds in on itself. Okay, that's how proteins work. And it's red. That's why our blood is red. The hemoglobin binds iron to it, okay? If somebody is anemic, that means they don't have enough iron in their blood, and it keeps the hemoglobin from doing its job, which is to chemically bind with oxygen, okay? So without the iron, you can't chemically combine to the oxygen quite as well, and it can be a serious problem. When the iron combines with the oxygen, it becomes an even brighter red. So the blood in your arteries that have oxygen combined with it is a much brighter blood than the blood in your veins. Remember, I told you in the last video, the blood in your veins is not blue, but it is a darker red. It's not quite as bright because when that oxygen comes in, it becomes a much brighter red. Dark red without the oxygen. Now, this chemical reaction I'm talking about, if given the choice, the hemoglobin and the iron in your blood is going to combine with carbon monoxide, okay? That's a C with one O. We've got carbon dioxide, two O's, but this is carbon monoxide. It actually likes to stick with the carbon monoxide even better than the oxygen. And that's a problem because cigarette smoke and vaping smoke contain carbon monoxide. And so when you're smoking those things, when you're inhaling those things, that carbon monoxide is actually replacing the oxygen in your blood. And this is why people that smoke tend to get winded much faster. They're not getting as much oxygen to their body as a non-smoker. So just another reason not to smoke. All right, let's go back to those platelets, okay? And you can see, like these little guys, those are the platelets, okay? So they gather at the site of bleeding. Anytime you cut yourself, even a little tiny paper cut, what you've done is you've opened a blood vessel. Chances are it's just a capillary, okay? But it is open and those blood cells are coming out. So when that happens, the platelets come and they stick to that site, okay? And they start getting the red blood cells to kind of stick in place. But they also release this chemical known as fibrin, okay? And what fibrin does is it weaves these tiny nets. So all this purple kind of Spider-Man looking stuff, that's fibrin, and that comes from the platelets. And it literally acts to trap those red blood cells, okay? And when they all get stuck together, it forms a little clot, and then the bleeding stops, okay? That's why when somebody cuts themselves, if it's not a vein or an artery, they still might be bleeding quite a bit. You just hold pressure on the wound, and it gives that it gives those platelets and those nets a chance to catch the blood and stop the bleeding, okay? If a vein or an artery is cut, oftentimes that actually requires surgery and it needs to be stitched up. If an artery is cut, now I get to get gross and graphic. Yes, my favorite part. If an artery is cut, I kind of talked about it in the last video a little bit, the blood actually spurts out with the heartbeat, okay? So every time the heart beats, you've got that pulse going through, the blood's going to come out along with that. A vein, since it's kind of on the back end of that cycle of blood, it doesn't have as much pressure to it, it's not going to spurt as much, but it's still going to come out pretty freely and quite a bit of it. It's still a very dangerous thing to cut a vein as well. There's a disease known as hemophilia, and a hemophiliac, a person with that disease, does not produce that fibrin. And so it's even a small cut for a person with hemophilia can be very dangerous because their body has a much more difficult time controlling the bleeding simply because they don't have those cool-looking Spider-Man nets, okay? All right, let's get into blood types a little bit. I know my screen is covering part of this chart, but it's okay. It's not going to get in the way. There's type A, there's type B, there's AB, and there's O, okay? Well, you see that each of these blood types have things known as antigens on them, okay? So the group, or the type A blood has A antigens. That's these things, okay? And what that is it's kind of an ID card. It lets all the other cells know, hey, this is type A blood, okay? So group B has B antigens. Type AB has both of those antigens, and then type O has no antigens at all, okay? So kind of keep that in mind as we go through. In addition to the antigens, inside the plasma, you're going to have these antibodies, and they are anti-something specific. So for type A, you have antibodies that are anti-B, which means if anything gets transfused, which means blood getting put into your system from some other source, if you get blood that has any of those B antigens on it, it can actually be deadly. Your body will reject it, and it'll clump, it'll clot, and your blood won't flow. It can be very dangerous, okay? So since type A only has A antigens and type O has no antigens, it is safe for a person with type A blood to receive type A, obviously, but also type O because there are no antigens on it. That anti-B antibody won't recognize anything on the group O or the type O blood as dangerous, okay? Now let's move on to type B. Type B blood has those B markers on it, but it contains anti-A antibodies in it. So if it receives anything with an A on it, it's going to be bad, which means it can only safely receive, a type B person can only safely receive type B, and again O because there are no antigens on it. All right, type AB. Type AB is interesting. Type AB has no anything, no antibodies, which means they can actually receive any kind of blood because those antibodies aren't going to recognize anything. There's nothing there. So it is safe for group AB to get any kind of blood. However, you can't give AB to a person with A or B because they have both of those markers, okay? So again, looking back at type B, they're anti-A, so they're going to fight against these A markers, okay? A person with type A blood is anti-B, and so they're going to fight against these B markers, okay? And then that leaves us with type O. Type O is known as the universal donor because it has none of those antigens on it. Nothing can fight against it. So everybody can get type O. It's very highly sought after because in emergencies, you can't always take the time to figure out what type of blood somebody is. And so they'll just give them type O because nobody reacts to type O. But they can't receive anything but type O, okay? Because they contain both anti-B and anti-A. That means any of these types of blood with those antigens, with those markers on it, will cause a problem for group O, okay? So again, because they have both of those antibodies, it's only safe for type O blood to receive type O blood, And yet everybody else, any other type, can receive type O blood, and that's why they're known as the universal donor, right? Good stuff. When you guys turn 16, you'll be old enough to go donate blood, and we have blood drives all the time. All right, if you look at page 613, there's kind of a fun lab that we would have done in class had we still been in school, thanks COVID-19. But if you guys can do it at home if you want. This kind of tells you how to set up the blood. I would have done this for you and just given you the water, the fake blood. But if you want to do this, in order to make type O blood, you just use a cup of plain water. In order to make type A blood, use a cup of water and 5 drops of yellow food coloring. Type B, again, 1 cup of water and then 5 drops of blue food coloring. But then for type AB blood, you're going to put 10 drops of both yellow and blue into it. Obviously, it's going to make green, but you're still using 1 cup of water, 10 drops yellow, 10 drops blue in there, okay? Now, the instructions tell you to use like an eyedropper for the different instructions that it gives and the different mixing that you're going to do. If you don't have an eyedropper, that's fine. You can use like 1/4 teaspoon. You can use a small measurement. Just make sure you use the same amount each time. So if it tells you to use like 10 drops, replace that with 1/4 teaspoon and then make sure you use that amount each time it says 10 drops, okay? I hope that makes sense. I hope some of you guys do this. Let me know if you do. Maybe there'll be some extra credit in it for you. Who knows? All right, that's all for today. Bye, guys.